In this additional rule for your PMP exam, we're taking a look at a very important topic. It's one of stakeholders. It's very important to be as proactive as possible in analyzing stakeholder influence, interest, and understanding the landscape of stakeholders. Let's take a look at 13.1. Let me show you a few items in data analysis. This is on page 512, and it reads, data analysis techniques that can be used in identify stakeholders include stakeholder analysis. Then it goes into a number of things that you're going to be analyzing. It talks about stakeholder stakes, including, but not limited to any of these or a combination of them, interest. A person or group can be affected by a decision related to the project or its outcomes. Therefore, they are interested. Rights. Legal rights, such as occupational health and safety, may be defined in the legislation framework of a country. Moral rights may involve concepts of protection of historical sites or environmental sustainability. So if a stakeholder has the right to be involved on a project, you need to pay attention to those. Ownership. A personal group has a legal title to an asset or property involved in the project. Knowledge. A stakeholder has specialist knowledge, really valuable knowledge. Pay close attention to those, right? Contribution, provision of funds or other resources. These are some of the little nuances in the analysis that you should be aware of. And these contribute in turn to you identifying this stakeholder in the next tool and technique. Data representation, power interest grid, power influence grid, or impact influence grid. If you don't understand these parameters about a stakeholder, the interest, the rights, the ownership, the knowledge, the contribution, you will struggle in filling out information that helps you map out the power interest grid, influence impact grid, and the power influence grid. So with you understanding through the analyses, you can then create this grid. And from this grid, you can go to the next level by creating a stakeholder cube, which adds the dimension of the stakeholder's attitude. And that could be looked at as a z-axis that comes out of the screen. So you can have power, you can have interest, and then you can have the attitude, which is the z dimension. But we don't stop there. If you take a look at page 513, stakeholder cube is not the end of the story. You got to go a step further, and you got to understand the Salience Model, which takes a look at power, urgency, and legitimacy of the stakeholders' involvement, and then build on that with directions of influence and then prioritization. And then you have a good understanding of the stakeholder landscape and when to get stakeholders involved, how much engagement you need from them, and things such as that. So let's take a look at our rule for today. Our rule for today states, be proactive in analyzing stakeholder level of power, interest, and other variables. You should be proactive when you're doing this because you could, as a project manager, be faced with the unexpected if you have not prepared properly for stakeholder involvement. And this comes on the heels of a question that stated something to the effect of a kickoff meeting being held with stakeholders to discuss the project management plan. And in the meeting, stakeholders suddenly disagree about the project's objectives. And the question is, what should the project manager have done in the past to prevent this? And the answer ends up being stakeholders' level of influence and interest should have been analyzed. That's what the project manager should have proactively done. But there were other options such as define a risk management plan, communicate the kickoff's objectives, delay the discussion. All of those would not have solved the problem other than the project managers really understanding the level of involvement for each stakeholder. And this is underscored when we take a look at the tools and techniques of Develop Project Charter. What do you find there? You find that meetings with stakeholders should happen. And what happens in these meetings? This is in the content outline, so you should probably know where I'm going with this. But if you take a look at 4.1, you take a look at meetings, tool and technique, which is mentioned here. Let's see what it says. Page 80. It says, for this process, meetings are held with key stakeholders. See that? To identify the project objectives, success criteria, key deliverables, and so on. So these meetings are being held with key stakeholders who are actually mentioned in the charter, and the understanding of the project's objectives and the buy-in is very important right from the get-go, even before you go to a wider identification of more stakeholders. So right from the get-go, as you're having these meetings, you also want to be doing some assessment, because you now have a stakeholder list. Begin to identify stakeholders as you find out about them and build on that understanding. And based on the understanding of the stakeholders, you know how to engage them, how to get their buy-in, when to get their buy-in, how to get them along for the ride and get their engagement. But it has to be done early. No risk register or no amount of other planning is going to help you in this regard. If you miss the boat on stakeholder influence and analysis, then everything else goes downhill. All right. And that is what this question was really trying to test. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you in the next episode. Bye for now.